Hi, everyone, and welcome to those of you who've joined us today for this really important webinar titled Shared Micromobility and Pandemic, Navigating Our Response. I'm Sam Herr, Executive Director of NABSA. For those of you who may not know who NABSA is yet, as this is a public webinar, the North American Bike Share Association, or NABSA, connects the biggest minds in bike share and shared micromobility to support, promote, and enhance shared alternatives to traditional transportation across North America. NABSA is the shared micromobility industry's membership organization with representation from system owners, operators, host cities, equipment manufacturers, and technology providers. I'm just going to wait another moment here as we see a lot of attendees filing in today. Thrilled to have so many folks registered for this. So we'll just give it a moment as folks are getting into the webinar, and then we will get going. All right, it looks like our attendees have filed in. So today, again, you're on a webinar titled Shared Micromobility and Pandemic, Navigating Our Response, and I'm Sam Herr, Executive Director of NABSA, or the North American Bike Share Association. And today we'll be discussing how the bike share and shared micromobility industry has been impacted by COVID-19 and how we are responded. Unfortunately, there is no Shared Micromobility 101 for navigating a pandemic like this. So with the COVID-19 situation constantly evolving, businesses closing, and shelter-at-home orders being issued, how do we prepare and respond to ensure that we serve our communities in the best ways that we possibly can? And so we're joined today on this webinar by colleagues at Houston Bike Share, City of Philadelphia, Bicycle Transit Systems, Jump, Bird, and Lyft, who will share their experiences and learnings about the topic. And then I'll also be sharing an update about NABSA's response to COVID-19 as well. And so a few notes about how to use the software before we begin the webinar today. As attendees, you're all muted by default. And so we're going to be using that question and answer box that you see most likely in the bottom of your screen. For some of you, it may be at the top, but it's next to the rest of the controls that you have for your video, audio, chat box, and those kinds of things. You'll see a Q&A box as well. You can put your questions in that box at any time. So while we're going through the presentations, as your questions are occurring to you, go ahead and put your questions in that Q&A box, and we'll get to them after the presentations at the end. So please do help us and use the Q&A box for your questions. It just helps us to organize them and get to as many as possible throughout the webinar. So that's great. So next, I want to introduce our presenters. Next slide, please. We have Beth Martin from Houston Bike Share. We have Aaron Ritz at City of Philadelphia. We have Allison Cohen from Bicycle Transit Systems. We have Colin Hughes from Jump. We have Caroline Sampinar from Lyft. We have Laura Fox from Lyft, and we also have Maurice Henderson from Bird, and you can see myself there at the bottom center of your screen. I'm your facilitator. If we haven't met yet, there I am. So the flow of this webinar is going to be that each presenter will give their short presentations, then we'll move on to some moderated questions, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And we do know that there's a lot of interest in this topic, and there are many questions, so we have scheduled an hour and a half for this webinar so that we can pack as much information sharing as possible into this webinar. Next slide. So first up, we have Beth Martin from Houston Bike Share. Beth Martin is the Executive Director of Houston Bike Share, a nonprofit organization that operates Houston B-Cycle, the bike share program for the city of Houston. After nearly a decade of working within the public policy, political advocacy, and civic engagement arenas, Martin joined the Houston B-Cycle team in 2018. Under Martin's leadership, the Houston B-Cycle system has doubled in size and seen record-breaking ridership. Thanks for being here, Beth, and take it away.
Hey everyone, thanks so much, Sam, Ariane, and the NABSA team for the opportunity for all of us to connect on how we're navigating this crisis. As Sam said, my name is Beth Martin. I'm the Executive Director of Houston Bike Share. Y'all can see some of our pretty faces on that beautiful picture. We are, like many nonprofits, we rely on bike rental revenue and sponsorship funding to cover our operations. And I think we are the only nonprofit panelist on the call today. So we're proud to represent the nonprofit run programs who operate bike share. We have, just to give you some context, we have 16 full-time employees and 5 part-time employees. About 3/4 of our team work on the operations side, and 1/4, the remainder, work on kind of the admin side of things. So currently, with this pandemic, Houston has been under a local stay home, work safe order, is what Houston calls it. This frames bike share as an essential business, and it allows people to continue using bike share for both transportation and recreation. Outdoor activity is considered an essential activity as long as people are following social distancing rules. That was initially, that came through 2 weeks ago. The weeks are running together. Yeah, 2 weeks ago. And it was initially set to expire April 3rd, but that order is now extended until the end of the month. So could I go to the next slide, please? Awesome. So I'm going to run through a timeline of some of the measures we've been taking to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and also how that's evolved for us over the last 5 weeks. Initially, during the first week when Houston really started to respond to this as a whole, and the community started to recognize the crisis that was kind of starting to evolve, and people were starting to take it more seriously, that was kind of kicked off with the cancellation of, I think it's the largest rodeo in the world here in Houston. The cancellation of an event like that was kind of, I think it really shocked Houstonians, and people started to take notice. In that week, we started allowing employees to work from home if possible. We canceled group rides and events, and we started to increase the sanitization measures for our bike share equipment, and also implemented new protocol in our shop and field. We also switched our communications to focus almost solely on COVID-19 prevention so that we could be echoing CDC guidelines and local public health official messaging. The following week, we sent a newsletter and set up an automated text message after check-ins to let our riders know that we were disinfecting bikes and stations more frequently, that we were enforcing strict personal hygiene practices among Houston B-Cycle personnel, and that we were continuing to monitor the latest updates from public health officials. The following week, we printed COVID-19 safety alerts and posted them at each of our 109 stations throughout Houston. We started incorporating pictures of our sanitization efforts into constant communications through social media. And we also experimented with hiring part-time workers to help ramp up sanitization efforts at our busiest stations during the busiest times. The most recent measure we've implemented is, as of last week, we decided to close 12 of our stations in the most popular parks due to concerns and observations with overcrowding happening. We did this to try and encourage more social distancing to reduce the congregating that we were seeing around our stations. And we did see an impact from that. We are considering if we need to increase the amount of stations. So we're kind of stepping through that. Clearly, as the crisis evolves, I think one of the biggest lessons learned is that you have to be nimble and adjust, and it's tough to do that as a nonprofit. But I'm really proud of our team for what we've just taken every day by day and each week by week and tried things out. So The last thing that we're starting to implement is a pretty unique thing that we've found is we got our hands on an EPA approved spray that we're going to start using weekly to disinfect all of our stations and bikes in the field. I think I know more about disinfecting supplies than I've ever known before. And we were able to get a small supply that will last us through the end of the month in order to conduct weekly sprays on all of our equipment in the field. So this is something we're really excited to implement and are doing that as soon as we basically sort out the logistics for it. In terms of feedback, can we go to the next slide? Yeah, so this was this is just a slide to show y'all what we put up at stations when we closed them. So that was the sign that essentially blocked people from interacting with the kiosk, and we wrapped all of our stations. And this is one of our awesome techs who is cleaning the touch screen of our stations. So that's that slide. Okay, you can go to the next slide, please. Great. So how has our ridership and feedback been? Our system saw 26,000 checkouts in March, and that's the highest monthly total in our program's history. That definitely played a major part in our decision to close those 12 stations. And it's also been a huge motivation to escalate our sanitization measures with the EPA-approved disinfectant spray and in hiring additional people to focus solely on cleaning equipment in the field. Feedback from our riders has been overwhelmingly positive. We sent out a press release when we did the closure of the stations and talked about our increased sanitization efforts, and a number of local outlets, as y'all can see on the slide, picked that story up and helped us to spread the word. Overall, this response has completely changed how we operate, especially regarding our technicians in the field who really are on the front lines. We've had lots of long meetings and tough conversations, but we are really grateful to continue serving Houstonians during such a trying time. And it's clear from the ridership that we've seen that people are seeking bike share, not only for a primary and secondary mode of transportation, but also as a needed recreation outlet. We just are strongly and constantly encouraging that they do that responsibly. Thanks everyone for listening, and I'm happy to answer questions you might have at the end.
Thank you. That was really excellent and incredibly informative information. So thank you for sharing that with us all today. And I'm sure there will be questions at the end. So we'll go to the next slide now. So next up here, we have Aaron Ritz from the City of Philadelphia and Allison Cohen from Bicycle Transit Systems, who are going to do a joint presentation. Aaron is the Transportation Programs Manager for the City of Philadelphia, Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability. A 10-year city bureaucrat who has a love-hate relationship with rules and process, Aaron is the Program Manager for Indigo Bike Share and has been involved with the program since its inception. He currently serves as a NAPSA board member, as one of the core team members of the Better Bike Share Partnership, a national initiative on creating an equitable and sustainable model for bike share. We also have Allison Cohen, President and CEO of Bicycle Transit Systems, who has a deep experience in the world of bike sharing, from hands-on operation and implementation of 7 bike share systems to contracting, business modeling, sponsorship acquisition, planning and feasibility assessments, and more. She's been riding her bike for transportation for most of her life and loves that she is increasing personal freedom through a new transportation choice that's cheap, fast, quiet, sustainable, and healthy. And Allison is also a NAPSA board member. So thank you both for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks, everybody. This is Aaron Ritz. I'm going to start moving through the slides here, and let's see if that works. All right. So just a quick overview of where we're at. We're in the same position as what we heard from Houston, where the City of Philadelphia has decreed bike share as essential transportation. The Indigo bike share program is owned by the city of Philadelphia and managed by Allison's team at Bike Transit. So a little timeline as Beth walked through as well. City schools and municipal offices closed March 16th. And, prior to that time, and especially after that time, we'd been, my role had been kind of to liaise with the operations team and the Department of Public Health and the Mayor's Press Office to make sure that our messaging was proactive about COVID and also very clear and consistent between what our public health officials, what our mayor was saying, and what our social media team and Indigo marketing was saying as well. We tried to be proactive with riders. Obviously there were concerns earlier, and those only grew over time. Are you sanitizing bikes? Are you making sure that things are clean? And how are you still operating in a sustainable way? And that messaging has really shifted over time. I think, as we'll show you in a little bit, some of our ridership was actually really amazing at the kind of the outset of the crisis, as things like bars closed down and things like bike share stayed open. It really pushed folks to enjoy Indigo quite a bit more, and that changed over time as the severity of the crisis in Philadelphia ramped up, and we really kind of changed from a messaging around please ride Indigo, socially distance yourself, but enjoy the program. The city even opened up a kind of a park road, closed it down to motor vehicle traffic, and opened it for socially distanced exercise. That got a lot of press. It got a lot of people out walking, biking, and that's been great. But as things progress, we're actually shifting our messaging more towards really the utility of bike share as a transportation option in a time when public transit, which is a big portion of how people in Philadelphia get around, isn't quite as safe in terms of disease transmission. And so we've really shifted our messaging to line up with that, which is, stay home. If you need to go out, you can use Indigo. Make sure that it's a reliable option. And I'll turn it to Allison here to talk a little bit about how Bike Transit internally manage their operations.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Aaron, you can just put the whole slide down. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. And just briefly about Bicycle Transit, we're an operations company. So we operate Indigo Bike Share in Philadelphia. We also operate Los Angeles Metro Bike Share and Las Vegas RTC Bike Share. We have 130 employees nationwide. So we're not as big as the Jumps and the Lyfts of the world, but it has been a really interesting experience leading through this crisis with 3 different cities and 3 different local environments going on and needing to take care of both employees and customers at that time. So there's a lot about the Houston experience that Beth talked about that I'm sure many of you are also going through, which we have experienced in Philadelphia. And because there are a lot of presenters, I'm just going to focus on one aspect that I think that we have done well as an organization. And this comes to the leadership approach that we've taken. So as I mentioned, we have 3 cities and several types of employees, going from on-street employees to people who sit at the computer all day. The first thing we did is take this thing seriously from February. And although I'm not a public health person, I listened enough to folks who are saying that this was a serious thing. And I think that is, as a leader, the best thing I could have ever done is to take it seriously from the beginning and not let it get ahead of us as much as we could do. So what we did is, and then how do you make decisions? As Beth said, and every single one of you knows, you have to make big decisions very quickly in this environment, and things are changing every single day. And this is a really difficult environment to operate in when you have a lot of different cooks in the kitchen. So what we did is to create a smaller, nimble group, 5 people. For our organization is small. That included human resources, operations, local general managers, to meet every day. So we have been meeting every day for a month for 30 minutes, check in on what the ridership is like. Are the systems staying open? How are the clients doing? How are the customers doing? What's been happening locally? How are employees feeling? And one of the main things we attacked first is obviously the employees. We want to make sure they stay safe. We implemented 2-week additional paid leave policies starting March 13th. So anyone who tested positive, had to take care of people, go out sick for other reasons, got 2 additional weeks of paid leave. We could have, on the one hand, if we said, if you don't feel uncomfortable coming in, you don't have to come in. We could have had a mass exodus. But then on the other hand, we have a lot of people who are really excited to be working. So we implemented a number of policies to cover both ends of the spectrum. We had a voluntary layoff, meaning if someone was uncomfortable coming in, we would report that it was a layoff to unemployment. That hasn't been taken up that much. So in any case, it's been really interesting. So we had this small, nimble, daily decision-making group and a larger working group to make sure that we kept our finger on the pulse. And so that's what I wanted to transfer to you guys. I think our employees are responding well, and I think I'm going to pass it back to Aaron to talk a bit about ridership and revenue.
Sounds good, thanks. I think some general observations, and I would really looking forward to the discussion later on this one, but in Philadelphia, what we've seen is that patterns change dramatically. That's not surprising because everything has seemed to change quite dramatically. And with that, there's definitely some reasons for concern or fear. And I think also there's an underlying hope behind this. I think there's a lot of positives that we can take as an industry out of this crisis. So this is just kind of a quick comparison of a before and after. So this is about a year ago. This is March 16th to April 7th. This is kind of our usage patterns. This is the general Indigo service. The big green dot there is right across from the Comcast building, and we had a very commute heavy workflow. We had Center City showing up very big and bright in terms of our usership, and then also kind of the medical campus and the university campus off to the side of town. And then this is what things look like now. It's actually a very different picture. Rides are down, as we'll show later, but it really highlights the sort of essential services that people are seeking with Indigo and getting to. So we have, pharmacy access, grocery stores, and I mentioned earlier that there's a pedestrianized street that has opened. It actually runs along the west of the Schuylkill River, and the station biggest and brightest there is actually the station right next to the Rocky statue. It's not so big and bright because of Rocky. It's big and bright because people are using it to access, just kind of recreational trips. So kind of a surprise in some ways. I think not surprisingly as well, the use case doesn't just show up location-wise, it shows up time-wise. So this is a kind of demand flows over the course of a day. It's at the left is midnight, at the right is 11 p.m. and it shows the twin peaks during the week of commuters going to work, commuters coming back from work, and the weekend here with kind of a recreation pattern where folks are just heading out post-brunch and enjoying a ride. And then to something that we see here, which is like, what day is it again? I guess we'll just kind of go out in the afternoon. And I think that also highlights that, just people need to move around in different ways now, and also that folks are seeking recreation. In terms of financial outcomes, I think, this is ridership. This is definitely an area for concern. When we're looking at this last week, as things have intensified in Philadelphia, we're down in a fairly concerning manner. And that's also reflected again in the revenue picture. So we're down on last year, although not as much as in terms of ridership. Interestingly, what we're seeing is a year-over-year growth in revenue, and I think that's due to, in part, our addition of e-bikes to the fleet, but also, all right, and this is our reason for hope here. This is kind of let's see if it's going funky on me. But in any case, you can actually see that the rider retention, this is the gray dotted line represents our number of pass holders over the past year, and we're actually ahead of that. We actually have a higher retention rate than we had over the past year. So that's really encouraging, and that's across all pass types, whether it's a monthly, annual, or also our low-income pass, which we call our access pass. So all good things, and I think that's reason to be hopeful. It's reason to kind of understand that people do see value in having another transportation option, particularly as you know, things like public transit and perhaps even ride-hailing are less desirable. It's a socially distanced way to get around, and that's a real plus. And I think that's it for me. I'm turning it back.
Great. Thanks, Allison and Aaron. It was really informative to get the internal operations response perspective, Allison, from you, and those statistics, Aaron, that you were showing about the changes in ridership patterns are certainly very interesting. So next up, as you'll see on the slide, we've got Colin Hughes from Jump. And Colin launched and operated the world's first public dockless e-assist bike share system in Washington, D.C. Previous to Jump, Colin was the director of global policy at the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, where he consulted on sustainable bicycle and transit mobility projects and policies in over 30 countries. Colin is a former international bike tour guide, bike advocate, and has a master's of city planning at UC Berkeley. So Colin, thanks for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Sam. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk through the COVID-19 response here at Jump. You can go on to the next slide. Great. So I think one of the first things, and we talked about this a little bit in an earlier NABSA conversation, Jump is in a lot of cities around the world. And one thing we've noticed that whether we're just looking at California as a state or whether we're looking at North America, Latin America, and Europe, we're seeing really different approaches by cities on what they want to see from micromobility in the crisis. And so we're seeing cities that are asking us to shut down because they're worried about micromobility being a vector for the spread of the virus. But then we're also seeing other cities label us essential services and asking us to please keep operating. So in some places, and our biggest, what we're doing there is really sitting down with cities and on a city-by-city basis, figuring out what way we can support the efforts there. You know, I would say anecdotally, it seems to me that cities that have a large transit-dependent population really want us to stay open because transit has taken service cuts right now. And micromobility is also looked at as less risky than transit. So micromobility can serve that transit-dependent population, and cities that are smaller and have a smaller transit-dependent population tend to be a little bit more conservative, I think, on this, and are more likely to ask us to shut down. So that's a pattern we've seen. Operationally, our operations response ramped up immediately as soon as this was flagged by our global team that's looking at, you know, health and safety risks. Very early in February, we put out a video to educate our entire staff around the globe on safe and consistent vehicle sanitation, and started a much more intense sanitation process. Got a screenshot from that video there, just showing how to wipe down the front of the bike and what materials to use, but also how our staff and team could ensure their own safety, so that we saw immediately that we would probably be looked upon as an essential service, and we wanted to make sure that we had the time to really put in place safe processes, consistent processes globally. We had an epidemiologist on staff to kind of consult on that, and just make sure that we were rolling this out in a safe way. So if we were relied upon and if the crisis got worse, we would be able to keep operating in a healthy and safe way as a team. So that was a big part of what's enabled us to keep operating in the places that cities have asked us to do so. Our urban planning team also then started looking at how demand was going to change. And so really early on, we started looking at our existing service areas, how demand patterns were changing, and how they were likely to change, and then talking with our city partners, what types of access and mobility they wanted us to facilitate. And obviously that came down to essential services. And since we have a dockless system, our service area is simply a geofence we started tailoring those geofences, and we started tailoring, first and foremost, really our deployment plans around where we put the vehicles to really focus on essential services. So we were putting a lot of those on medical campuses. We were putting them around grocery stores, and really just trying to make sure that the people who need the vehicles the most had access to them. Next slide, please. And so that was what we were doing operationally. But then we're also looking at, you know, this is just overall, it's a massive threat to the city. The city is, you know, the city is where we work. It's where all our services are. The city government is our main partner, and that's where all our customers are. So we started looking at ways we can really focus on the civic response, and that our immediate efforts, which were focused kind of on the preparing for the pandemic to get more serious, and then now where we're closing in on, you know, peak in a lot of places, the types of initiatives we could stand up really quickly were, first, we did a free jump rides for essential service workers globally. So any essential service, and we're doing this kind of at the employer level scale. So any employer who is operating an essential service can contact us. We have an intake form. There's a blog up on our Jump website and another one on the Uber website. And Uber is doing some similar work as well. Can contact us, can tell us what they need. That request will be vetted. And, you know, in the case of Jump, we can isse them a code that any of their employees, that employer can give to any employee, so that they can get free Jump rides. And so that discount starts at 20 trips for 30 minutes a trip. And we started that off with some pretty high profile partnerships that our local teams were just building in places like London. The National Health staff has access to that. In DC, on a much smaller level, like I'm a part of a community response network, and we were able to get Jump rides for any of the volunteers that are being matched with people who need deliveries, can get a code from the administrators of the volunteer service, and then can go out and do volunteer work on the Jump bike. We in Berlin, we were shut down. We were asked by the government to shut down, but then we were talking with them, and we saw a need for hospital staff at one of the city's largest hospitals to get people around the campus. So in that place, we had kind of, the conditions were right, where very quickly we just stood up a private fleet only for workers at the hospital to use. So that's another type of initiative we've done. And then that's all kind of part of a larger campaign that our parent company, Uber, is doing. They made a commitment for 10 million free rides and deliveries. That includes Jump rides. I think what's also interesting about this campaign, and I think a lot of I heard this from a number of the people who presented before me, which is, really how you communicate to your customers and to your communities. One of the things Jump is focusing on is saying, of course you should always wash your hands. You should try to sanitize the bike, even though we're doing that on an increased cadence. But you should also not be using our bikes unless you need it for an essential trip. And Uber is doing the same thing, where they actually have a stop moving campaign. And the idea is, should only be using personal mobility service when it's an essential trip, and it can't be done by delivery. Uber, is not only a multimodal platform with bikes and cars, but it also has Uber Eats. And so Uber Eats is really being relied on now. That business is really busy. We're looking at ways of, we know that a lot of delivery people, both on the Uber platform, but also on other ones, are using Jump bikes to make these deliveries. And so we're looking at ways where we can ramp that up. Our freight service is also really busy, trying to get the right supplies to the right places. But then it's all a part of a message of, kind of don't move around, use a delivery service to get something to come to you, unless it's really an emergency. Next slide. And when we think about our civic response, what we're doing with cities as a partner, early on, we were preparing to provide an essential mobility service. That was in the first month or two since the first infections in the US. That's in the preparatory phase. We think there's going to be 3 phases. We're basically now in the peak phase where we're just really trying to make sure we're providing mobility for essential services as cities and communities cope with, with peak infection rates and with, serious strain on medical and essential services. And then so those are the 2 we've been working on. What we're in the phase of planning right now, and what I think is going to be really interesting to hear more from this conversation is the recovery phase. And that's going to be, month 6 to who knows when, I think, because the economic impacts are going to affect mobility for a long time. And so we're looking at ways where we can support cities to fill mobility gaps if transit budgets are slashed, to look at how we can help for employment and distribution, in the wake of this, and making sure that when we come out of this, and actually can hit the next slide, my last slide, when we come out of this, micromobility can play a key part of resilient mobility. And so we've long known that this is the case. I think for our whole industry, this crisis is an opportunity for us to really step up and help cities and, flex a lot of the muscles we've long known that this industry has in making a city more resilient. And what we hope to see coming out and be a part of also contributing to is making sure that there's more safe infrastructure for more micromobility, that we can fill the gaps, that public services and other services and an economic recession may cause, and do so in a way that's environmentally and socially sustainable.
Thanks, Colin. That global perspective was really informative, and it was interesting to hear how JUMP's been partnering in different ways in different places across the globe, from hospital access to volunteer delivery pickup partnerships, free rides for essential workers and things like that. So thank you very much. And now we'll move on to our next slide. I'm going to introduce Caroline Sampanaro and Laura Fox from Lyft. So Caroline joined Lyft in 2018 to start the company's new bike, scooter, and pedestrian policy program. In this new role, Caroline leads efforts to form strong partnerships with cities on policy initiatives like Vision Zero and Complete Streets redesigns, as well as help realize specific goals around bike and scooter shared mobility. And she is also a NAPSA board member. Laura Fox is currently the general manager for City Bike, Lyft's bikes and scooters business in New York City and Jersey City, where she oversees strategy, growth, operations, marketing, and local P&L. Laura is also an adjunct professor of MBA strategy at NYU Stern School of Business. So happy to have you both talk a bit about Lyft and the COVID impacts and response. Thanks for being here. Turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sam. This is Caroline. Hey, everyone. I'm happy to be joining such a great panel. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to start us off and then pass it to Laura quickly so she can go deeper on the City Bike response, which I think is a great example. We're all feeling a lot of emotions right now, no doubt, as people that love cities, that work in transportation. This is a really emotional and challenging time. I know that the Lyft team is taking great comfort during this time in sort of realizing the real value and importance of our work, and in particular, the ways in which bike share systems and increasingly shared scooter systems provide very essential value in cities, and that is recognized, I think, now in a time of crisis more than it probably has ever been before. We all joke probably as people that love bikes too, right? Like the bike has really proven the test of time. And in some ways, some of the lessons we're learning now are things that many of us, including Allison Cohen, I know, for example, and I lived through Sandy in New York City, and getting through that moment as a city was a really challenging time. The bike was used by a lot of New Yorkers for the first time during that crisis. And it was something that actually stuck with New York City. People continue to ride. And I think I'm trying to see the glass half full here, and I know the whole Lyft team is. I think we have been really moved by the way that the bicycle in particular and the bike share systems increasingly are giving people essential access to where they have to go, but also are being sort of rising to the occasion as heroes in this moment of crisis. So on the slide here is just some examples of the great partnerships we have in place because of the shared micromobility systems that we operate. And it's really, for me personally, even moving to see the mayor of New York speak about our partnership in this way. Next slide, please. So I just want to quickly give an overview. We spent the last 4 weeks essentially jumping into action to better serve our city partners. And we kicked off the ground a critical worker campaign in particular. And the sort of broad strokes of what that program is it's free month-long access to our bike share systems and our scooter share programs for critical workers. That includes healthcare workers, transit workers, first responders, and a variety of other folks. And in all cases, we've really been following the lead of our city partners. The campaign was first launched in New York City by Mayor de Blasio during one of his daily COVID press gatherings. And we've been signing up partners in New York City at hospitals, and Laura's going to tell you more about that. In Chicago, we've worked closely with CDOT and the mayor of Chicago to include reduced cost single pass trips for Divvy, as well as reduced cost memberships for essential trips. So we have our critical worker program in place, and we've also added just reduced access to the Divvy system, and that has been, I think, a really positive thing to witness. In DC, it's been really powerful to watch us be able to combine our Capital Bike Share services with the scooters we have on the ground, and so critical workers are able to access both those two-wheeled options, which I think we all believe in the power of the bike and the scooter coming together in one program, but it's nice to see in this moment of crisis that happen and take shape quickly. Yeah, and so every system where we're operating, we are running one of these critical worker programs. And I think big takeaways are that we're delivering real value and we're serving real need. Like was said before, I think it's been a powerful thing to watch our bike share systems and scooter systems be deemed essential. I think that, as Colin mentioned, when we think ahead to the lessons we're going to carry forward, it's important to remember that many of us have always felt that bike share systems are a part of the public transit network, but in a time like this, we're really seeing bike share systems in particular serve as true redundancy for the transit network. We're working closely with transit agencies across the country and actually helping proactively fill first last mile gaps, both on the rideshare side and with bikes and scooters. And I think that's the kind of partnership that we've always had. And I think this is a moment where we're digging deep and making those partnerships even stronger. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Laura Fox, our general manager of the City Bike program. Laura, next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Yeah, I think just to echo a lot of what Caroline and others have said, this is a terrible time, I think, for all of us. And I think in bikes and bike share, is really, a time where I've stepped back and definitely thought about it's a terrible time, but makes me think even more about our values operators, and that's never been clearer during this time. And that as, an urbanist and someone who's passionate about cities and sustainable mobility and getting people where they need to go, that these are some of the moments when we can support cities the most. So I think when, we at City Bike were thinking about how to respond to this crisis, we had a few goals. So first, how can we support our city partners and make sure that they have the resources that they need? Secondly, how can we support critical workers and the essential workers who need to kind of have a transportation need as part of their daily routine? And then thirdly, how can we ensure the safety of our community? So riders, staff, associates, making sure that health, safety, that they have a reliable form of transportation during this time. So those were really the groundwork and the principles that we use when thinking through what are the new protocols that we should stand up. To Caroline's point, what are the new programs that we want to launch to support cities and critical workers and all of that? And so to speak specifically about the new protocols, we really broke this down into, what are the different surfaces that we need to be cognizant of across bikes and vehicles? how do we keep riders aware of all the things that we're doing, and shared knowledge of different programs like the critical worker program, making sure that they're sharing that with friends, as well as staff policies. And so just to, go into more detail in a few of those here, for bikes, we've aggressively increased our cleaning protocol to help protect, the safety of our community. We always had a protocol where anytime a bike would come into our depot, that it would get thoroughly cleaned. Now, in addition to disinfecting bikes every time they come into a depot, we have valets who are disinfecting bikes every time they come into a valet station. All of our field bike mechanics are out there cleaning every bike at every station that they visit. And some of them are focusing on high traffic stations, so the ones where we're seeing the top ridership right now. And then additionally, like when I think about response, like those are the kind of like macro mass. And so like, how do we touch the most number of bikes and disinfect the most number of bikes per day? And then secondly, how do we really focus those efforts around the critical workers that we're looking to support? So we've now stood up a number of valets at stations adjacent to hospitals that are seeing significant ridership and who are disinfecting bikes as soon as, a healthcare worker comes in, to ensure that the next person who uses that and the person who's then taking it out away from the hospital has a great rider experience and has a clean surface. Again, keeping hospital workers top of mind. Secondly, on vehicles and vehicle handling, and then staff policies, like really vehicles and vehicle handling are about making sure that there's no contamination on services of vans, to ensure that, workers aren't touching a bike and then touching a console and touching, an artifact of themselves. And so we're disinfecting high contact surfaces of vans. So that's things like steering wheels, door handles, center consoles, all of that. Anytime in our warehouses, mechanics and associates handling vehicles use gloves and plastic grips, and are required to frequently wash hands. And then we've stood up a number of those staff policies to make sure that, CDC guidance is clearly communicated. We have, similar management practices in place, as I heard other organizations mention earlier, in terms of making sure that if anyone with a symptom is detected, that they stay home. We do full kind of facility disinfecting, ensuring communication across team members if we do detect anyone testing positive. So all of that's in place. And again, for rider communications, really wanting to make sure that we communicate to riders all the work that we're doing, and also make sure that we give them an easily digestible form to understand some of the latest CDC guidance. We know that some of that CDC guidance is phenomenal, but want to make sure that we're surfacing it so that, our community has it top of mind and at their fingertips. We've also included in-app notifications to remind people to wash their hands, done this on social, really look to get the word out. And I think one of the things that's been, as Caroline mentioned, with our city partners, but we've also seen kind of come in from riders, is just the appreciation. I think, we included 2 posts here of just like shout outs to some of, the field associates who are out there disinfecting bikes every day, and riders really recognizing them. It's something that I hear kind of daily on calls with, field bike mechanics or our service delivery groups, that they're really getting, appreciation as, another frontline worker group out in the field, and being recognized for their work, which I think is a good virtuous cycle as we think about our own employees being kind of on the front lines and essential workers as well. Next slide, please. So what comes next? And I think Caroline and I will share this slide. But I think as Caroline mentioned, as I've heard others mention, this is a time where we're planning for the current. So what are we doing now? How are we really ramping up disinfecting? How are we ensuring that we're serving people with really critical and essential functions? And then as we think to the future, so that whatever the time period is when we emerge out of this, I hesitated to this point to even give my guess. We really looked at a number of case studies in the past. So Caroline brought up the Sandy instance where a number of people, began riding. We saw a 20% growth in terms of people who rode at least several times a month. After that, there was a 2005 transit strike in New York City, where we saw again, a 20% rise in cycling the year after that. And when we look at initial reports that are coming out of China, we're seeing kind of growth in ridership there as well. And so I think as we come out of this, I think that emphasis that Carolyn gave to like the small hero of the bicycle being something that's a great mode for getting people to and from where they need to go is very top of mind for us as we prepare, you know, our operations, rider communications, on all of that for the time when we emerge. So yeah, again, just want to end with the fact that, you know, this is a time when I think all of us, you know, at Lyft and at City Bike have really felt like our, you know, mission and our values operators hasn't ever been clearer. And it's a time when, you know, we're working with the city additionally to do things like expand capacity, running through operation scenarios, and we're excited, you know, for when we're able to all go back to work, to be in a place where we're ready to support people on the trips that they'll be taking.
Yeah, I mean, that's perfectly said. The only thing I'd add is just, I think I know the folks on this webinar in particular, and NAPSA, especially as a representative of the industry, is thinking a lot about what the industry takes away from this kind of a moment. And you know, the last couple of years has been full of a lot of change and uncertainty in the industry, a lot of growth. And I think, you know, as we watch, perhaps in some ways, this moment shrink that, you know, that there are important takeaways. The examples that have been shared so far in the webinar really always go back to the city leadership that's essential to these systems being successful, but also providing real value, especially in a time of crisis. I think it's powerful to think about the voice that we can all have in, you know, deepening the types of public-private partnerships we have, you know, more intentionally including transit agencies in those partnerships, so that bike share can really live up to its potential to be a part of the transit network and serve a sort of redundant feature, especially in these times. I think also, you know, looking at a street like the one on the screen now, there's obviously a lot of ways that we can expand the network of open streets and protected bike lanes. And I think we're also seeing a lot of risk there. And so the ways that we can, as an industry, support cities as they seek funding from the federal government to ensure that our bike lane plans are on track is going to be really critical. And I know at Lyft, we're really, you know, we're already looking ahead to that to make sure that we're doing the best we can when it comes to that kind of partnership. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Caroline and Laura. That was really excellent. And a few things that I'm grateful that you pointed out. I mean, one, the attention that you gave to you know, bike share operators are actually one of the frontline and essential workers in the situation. And so, you know, that's a huge job right now. And that's an important point, I think. Also, just love that you shared, you know, about Lyft's critical worker program, and also in terms of disinfecting real time, you know, valleys at hospitals, and disinfecting those bikes as they're coming in real time, and just some of those more general points about, you know, that this can be a time of deepening those partnerships with cities and operators, and everyone at the table, all the stakeholders in a community that really makes bike share and shared micromobility work. So that's great. So we're going to move on to our last presentation from our panel today. Next slide. So we have Maurice Henderson from Bird, and Maurice Henderson is a director of government partnerships at Bird. He's worked both domestically and internationally in the public and private sectors, as well as on a number of political and advocacy campaigns across the country. He has served in various capacities in government as well as in the transit industry, including as the Chief Operating Officer for the Tri-Met County Metropolitan Transportation District of Oregon in Portland, Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler's Chief of Staff, the Deputy Director at the Portland Bureau of Transportation, the Chief Administrative Officer for the Technology Office of Washington, D.C., and as the Deputy Press Secretary for former Virginia Governor, who's now U.S. Senator Tim Kaine. And Maurice is also a NAPSA board member currently. So Maurice, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sam. Really appreciate the opportunity to join you in this panel today, and look forward to the questions a little bit later. So at Bird, we, like everyone else has mentioned, have really been thinking through what are the best approaches that we can take to both supporting the communities in which we've been serving, both the residents being our riders, as well as our staff, and making sure that our city partners are fully engaged and aware of those activities as we move forward. So as the first slide says, we've been fully focused on that effort. Operationally, we've been increasing the daily frequency for which we do our cleaning and sanitization of vehicles in the field. And that includes the sterilization of helmets. As some folks know, we have Bird Cruiser, essentially an e-moped device that's been launched in a couple of markets. And so there are helmet boxes as a piece of that. We've also been increasing the frequency of our deep cleans, or as we call them, our bird baths, that take place at our local service centers in some of the markets that we are still active in. We've been providing extra gloves for our field service staff members, as well as hand sanitizers for those members. And as others have mentioned before, we've closely been monitoring with the CDC, the World Health Organization, and other trusted global agencies and federal agencies have been saying on an hour-by-hour basis, which has been really important to our operational outlook. I can go to the next slide, please. Some of the things that we're working on in terms of our efforts on the ground right now, as I mentioned, we're working with cities, our city partners and community-based partners on a daily basis, getting an assessment of what's happening and how best to be supportive of efforts there. Again, the health and safety of residents, riders, and our team is a top priority at Bird. So a couple of examples that I can provide. In the midst of this global health crisis that's affecting millions of people across the world, we know that nearly 60% of our riders have been using our services to get to commerce in their hometowns, in their areas. And so at the beginning of March, we announced that we're piloting a new in-app feature that allows riders to quickly identify restaurants that are serving takeout and delivery services. And we've been doing that in Santa Monica as a first test bed. In order to do that, you simply open the updated Bird app, and the participating establishment will be clearly marked on the map with a colored pen. When you tap that pen, the featured restaurant information will be expanded on the page, and displays details, address, photos, contact information, etc. And so, by highlighting this, we're trying to make sure that we make it easier for people to access that sort of choice, and also to help amplify those workers and those places that are still doing business and offering that critical service. In this case, the food industry. We're also really proud to announce, as some of the others have spoken about, that last week we were able to start providing free electric scooter rides to healthcare workers and emergency personnel in certain markets. And so that program currently has initially rolled out in a couple of US markets and also in a couple of international markets, those being Tel Aviv and Antwerp, as well as Santa Monica and Culver City. And as we're continuing to assess the viability and efficacy of those programs, and talking to the folks that we're trying to support in those efforts, we're constantly trying to see what other ways that we can be supportive in the community, and particularly the medical community globally. In Northern Italy, in Turin, we've loaned a small fleet of birds out to the local Red Cross, so they're able to deliver food and medicine to elderly residents and COVID patients that are currently confined to their homes. In order to, and as was mentioned earlier, we have a similar sign-up process. Simply, email us a copy of your medical credentials or identification card with your name, phone number at our together@bird.co website or email, and we can start that process up for you quickly. That enables riders to receive 2 free up to 30-minute rides per day and we'll be doing this for as long as it takes for our communities to recover from this global pandemic. Again, our team is closely monitoring all of the rapidly changing factors on the ground, and trying to figure out, again, the best ways that we can be of support. Another thing that I'm, personally really excited about, we just launched this, I believe just yesterday made the announcement of our Local Heroes program. And what that is an opportunity to honor essential workers. The team at Bird has created this program to nominate workers and volunteers in their communities who are playing a crucial role in the fight against the current pandemic. All you need to do is simply fill out the brief online form. We'll recognize the submitted local heroes on our website and social media channels throughout the coming weeks. So as we've seen, I'm sure in media, folks in cities, communities coming out and really showing their appreciation and admiration for the courage that healthcare workers and other folks who are out in the field, first responders, grocery store folks, everyone who's playing a role in helping to stem the tide and hopefully bend the curve. If you can go to the next slide, please. And so what, the question's been asked about what the future is for Bird and for micromobility, and the other members of the panel have spoken to this. So I'll highlight a few things. It's clear that the environmental impact of having nearly 33% of our global population in some form of shelter in place is having an effect on our environment and on our climate. There are many factors at play here that, for the short term, that include sort of the industrial spaces closures, whether that's factory closures or flight groundings, and then you have the removal of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of automobiles from our streets. It's still hard to say what those results are going to end up being, but I think the early indicators have been really fascinating from an environmental perspective. If you think about it, from the peak of China's COVID quarantine, the nitrogen dioxide levels in the air dropped as much as 30%. In Paris, the city's Air Portif Association announced in March that the air quality in the French capital was better than it had been in the last 40 years. When you're looking at government data across the globe, another one that we felt was really interesting was to see that New Delhi saw a 70% decrease in a span of a week in terms of the air, the air pollution situation. So from those perspectives, it's been pretty powerful from an environmental frame. One of the leading minds in this space is Mark Neuweissen, who's a research professor and the director of the Urban Planning Environmental Health Initiative and the director of the Air Pollution and Urban Environment Program over at IS Global in Barcelona. And he mentioned that the COVID pandemic is a wake-up call and maybe also an opportunity to build better and more sustainable societies and cities. And I think at Bird, we've really been taking that kind of thinking to heart about the kind of advocacy that we do, the kinds of engagements that we're making in cities. The professor, highlighted some of the other things that are happening in terms of, how this is affecting our thinking. And, a couple of things he highlighted in terms of the 8.8 million or estimated 8.8 million people worldwide who die prematurely from air pollution, and giving rise to an average reduction of about 2.9 years of the average lifespan for people across the globe. 3.2 million people die prematurely due to insufficient physical activity, and then add on top of that the 1.35 million or so every year who are killed in auto accidents. And so we have some real opportunities as we think about what the world will look like post-COVID. And Bird, and I think all of the panelists and the organizations that they represent and companies that they represent have really spoken to that in the way that we're thinking about the future. I think while the focus of this conversation is rightly on the pandemic's impact as it relates to micromobility, I think it's also really important to note, and I don't think I've heard it yet, so I'll just point out that the situation has further exposed, as the Nation recently said in its headline, that COVID-19 shows America's class divide is untenable. And that the issue is being highlighted in several countries around the world. And I think this is an opportunity for us to take a moment to fundamentally challenge ourselves, to reimagine what our systems and institutions truly need in order to create more an environment for profitable businesses to support cities and societies' stated goals towards equitable access. And obviously this is from the perspective of micromobility and mass transit for us, but should be one of those areas where we spend some time focusing. At Bird, we're also making sure that we're engaging that conversation in a really thoughtful way and meaningful way, and engaging both our city partners in the government, as well as our local partners who make up the communities in which we serve. According to some survey data from Bird, in major US cities, Portland, Denver, and San Antonio as an example, between 33 to 50% of scooter trips are replacing those made by cars. And in transit-rich cities like Washington, D.C. and Paris, sort of as Colin alluded to earlier, we've seen as much as 25% of those trips connecting to transit. So, I think it was Carolyn who made the comments about scooter share and bike share being a redundancy for those systems, especially at this moment where there's such a critical need. Another thing that we're really focused on for the future is advancing that conversation around the safe infrastructure. So looking at that mode shift, looking how it's affecting our CO2 levels. Statistically, we know that about 61% of e-scooter riders list protected bike lanes as the single biggest factor in contributing to their own sense of safety. And so that's something that we are also very focused on. I know that and as part of the stimulus package, this is something that I think both industry partners, bike share and biking enthusiasts, pedestrian enthusiasts, people who are advocating for those who are differently abled, elderly folks, will be looking for those kinds of investments in cities, and Bird certainly plans to be a partner in those conversations going forward. In places like Nashville, we've seen the effect. It's resulted in the construction of the city's first downtown bike lane. In Paris, Mayor Hidalgo is trying to implement the 100% cyclable streets, 100% cyclable streets initiative in the French capital by 2024. And lastly, I'll leave you with this interesting piece from the New York Times. Noted that at a time like this, tragedy really creates opportunity, and in this case, the opportunity is to make the system work for everyone. She pointed out that so many of our systems have been highlighted to be poorly supporting people. Fortunately, bike share and e-mobility, e-scooters have been one of those areas of our society that has really been able to step up and support so many important pieces of our society, particularly our healthcare workers, our first responders, other folks who are in a position where they don't have the option to work from home and need to be able to move around the city. And we give them an option out there that we are continuing to make sure is as safe and sanitized as possible, adhering to all of the social distancing and other sanitation requirements that are out there. So again, we're really excited about the future opportunities that Bird will have to engage those conversations with city partners and community partners and all the folks on this panel. And thank you for your time. Look forward to the questions.
Thanks, Maurice. Really appreciate that. And you made some, nice points about broader context, environmental impacts of, this COVID situation, stay at home, as well as some of the opportunities that might exist post-COVID. Pointed out some, this big topic of systemic inequalities, and how those might be showing up now and what we can do to make our systems better in the future. So yeah, thank you very much for that. We'll go to the next slide. Some folks are on the call now that weren't in the very beginning, and this is a public webinar, so not everyone may be familiar with NABSA. So I'm just gonna mention again who NABSA is, what we do. So NABSA, short for the North American Bike Share Association. We connect the biggest minds in bike share and shared micromobility to support, promote, and enhance shared alternatives to traditional transportation across North America. We are a membership-based organization, and our members represent system owners, operators, host cities, equipment manufacturers, and technology providers. So very quickly, I'm gonna run through, because I do want to save as much time for questions as possible, I'm gonna run through what some of NABSA's responses have been to the COVID-19 situation. So in addition to the webinar that all of you are on today, we have been continuing to advocate for bike share and shared micromobility to weave micromodes further into the fabric of public transportation policy, and looking at some of the opportunities that actually Maurice just mentioned, and also Caroline in her presentation. So we have been having conversations with partners and allies about opportunities for bike share and shared micromobility broadly in a phase 4 stimulus package that may happen, which could be a possible path to pursue some of our priorities for surface transportation reauthorization, which does include federal recognition for bike share and shared micromobility as a form of public transportation, more funding for systems and the infrastructure that supports ridership, prioritizing vulnerable roadway user safety, and also incentivizing complete streets design. So still working towards that, and there might be some opportunities to make some gains in that area coming out of this. We also held a member video chat last week with our members to compare notes and learn from each other. Also, our member email group has been a big source of information sharing right now and has been active as we all work to navigate COVID-19. And to keep this, this momentum going, NABSA is also launching Slack for our members, which will launch tomorrow and be a further way that our members can chat one-on-one and also as a group to continue to share learnings. And just a reminder that any NABSA member employee can take part in this. Also, NABSA is currently working on a tracking document that will be tracking or is tracking the current status of shared micromobility service and response to COVID-19 in North America. So we're working on that now. This information will be publicly available. So once we have it, it's not complete yet, but we're hoping to have it up and on our website next week. It will be available on our homepage, a link there to go get it. So please stay tuned for that. Check our homepage. We will be announcing when we have it, but we're creating a tracking document that will have information as best as we have it in real time. And we'll also be requesting all of you to help us update that, that information as well. So we have a tracker that we'll be posting to our site next week. Next slide, please. Many of you have been wondering perhaps about the NABSA conference. I just want to mention that currently we are still moving ahead as planned, and we are monitoring the situation and will communicate any updates to those plans if and when those may occur as we know them via email, and our conference page that is now live on our site as well. So currently our conference is September 30th to October 2nd in Guadalajara, and moving ahead as planned right now, and are monitoring the situation if we have to make any updates to that plan. Next slide. Also wanted to announce for everyone on the call that NABSA has a Facebook page now, so please do find us and like us there, as well as we have LinkedIn, Twitter, a really great blog on our site, and a newsletter that you can subscribe to in the footer of our website. So please do connect with us in all of those ways, whether you're members or not. For NABSA members, a reminder that any employee of a NABSA member organization can take advantage of our resources and opportunities that we offer. So please, if other colleagues don't know about it yet, please help spread the word. And for folks on this webinar who are part of organizations that are not yet an NAPSA member, please do consider joining us to get access to all of our member benefits. And you can check out more about that on our website, and also get in touch with us if you want to learn more. So now I'm going to turn it over to Zoe Kirkus from People for Bikes, who's going to give a very exciting announcement. Go ahead, Zoe.
Thank you, Sam. So next slide. People for Bikes is part of the Better Bike Share Partnership. For those of you who are not familiar, Better Bike Share Partnership is a national grant-funded collaborative made up of the City of Philadelphia, the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia, NACTO, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and People for Bikes. We've been working for the past 6 years to increase access to and use of bike share and actually shared micromobility of all types in low-income communities and communities of color. And I'm happy to let you know that we are able to offer a small number of emergency response grants to bike share systems that are still operating during this time. I gave just a couple details on this slide. There is more information available on the Better Bike Share website. That's www.betterbikeshare.org. We have a recent blog. It's up on all our social media. A key eligibility requirement that is not noted here and that I'm sorry to share with you is that eligible systems must be located in the United States. Sorry to all of those of you in other countries, but that is a requirement that's placed on us by the organization that funds the Better Bike Share Partnership. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. We want to make these awards very quickly. So the deadline for applications is a week from tomorrow. The application is available on our website. You're welcome to call or email me with any questions. There's my email and contact information right there. Hope to see some great applications. I do want to note that sadly we don't have tons of money, because who does these days? So we'll probably be able to award maybe 8 to 10 grants, but hoping to do our part to help out systems during this time. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Zoe. That's incredible aid to the bike share and share micromobility community right now. So just a huge thanks from the community to Better Bike Share Partnership for offering those in this time of need. So so thank you very much. And I do encourage everyone to take Zoe up on her offer who is eligible. Okay, so next slide. We're going to move on to questions. And because we are a little bit short on time, even despite our best efforts of Q&A, I'm going to kind of wrap my moderated questions in with the Q&A questions as they've been coming in from the audience as well. I have been noting some themes, so I'm going to do my best to sort of capture some of those themes and formulate them into some topical questions. So the first, and actually I'll respond to one of the questions that came in was just about whether this is going to be shared as a recording, and so I'll just answer that straight away. Yes, we are recording it, and yes, we will be sharing it out at the end. So there have been some questions about sanitation practices and sort of the scenario in which, as many folks on this presentation have noted, there are some real-time cleaning after every use protocols that are happening. However, of course, there are also some times in which there are rides in which the bikes don't go back to the depots, or they're just on the street and they actually haven't been cleaned, by an operator, between uses or something like that. So there's sort of two pieces to this question that I've seen as sort of a theme that's merged. One piece is just about sort of operationally, what's the thinking around that instance, and then two, what's the communication to riders and sort of the rider responsibility, in that kind of scenario. And so I'm actually going to ask maybe Laura and also Allison, since you all deal with the nuts and bolts operations of the bikes in particular, to give it a stab. So Laura, not to put you on the spot, but maybe you can kick us off on a response there.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as I mentioned, this has been incredibly top of mind for us. I mean, we, in the first couple of days when we were thinking about our response, ran the number of bikes that come through our depot. And while that's sizable, it's about 700 a day. Like, that's not sufficient when you have a fleet of about 15,000 bikes, right? And so we really wanted to make sure that we got disinfectant in the hands of all of our field associates who are touching bikes when they are in the field and have the potential to disinfect many more bikes. And so, for example, we have a large team of field bike mechanics. It's around 15 to 20 people who essentially during each shift, and they go and repair bikes in the field so that they don't need to be sent back to a depot. Instead of them just working on that one bike, they're actually disinfecting every bike that's at every station that they go to. So that's yielding a huge volume of disinfecting. We've retained all staff during this period. And so as say peak ridership and demand numbers go down, we are rotating people from things like functions to be valet overflow and, in the financial district or Midtown, to being either roving kind of disinfecting, so playing a similar role as field bike mechanics, and going through set routes of disinfecting stations, and or to place like that deep focus on supporting like healthcare workers as one of our more vulnerable populations right now. And so we've really kind of transitioned fully and look to have as many of our staff as possible working on disinfecting duties.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And this is Allison. I'll reflect, especially in Los Angeles, where Metro is our client. We are. It's been very interesting because that bike share system is enmeshed in the public transit system, and so all the policies that Metro is rolling out, we are reflecting in a bike share specific way. So we've definitely increased cleaning, and we've even moved employees such as like brand ambassadors. They're now out cleaning to help ramp up that effort. Another interesting aspect from the employment standpoint is we have changed our staffing plan to ensure there are fewer people at the warehouse at any given time. And so I think we're going to like 4 10s rather than 5 8s. And then the other impact of the shutdown is our employees are not feeling safe being out on empty streets at night. In both Philadelphia and LA, we've heard that. So we've actually shortened our night operating hours and changed our staffing hours to both help with social distancing while people are in the warehouse, either doing bike repairs or general operational activities, and reduced any on-street night hours.
Cool, thanks, Allison. And I'll just note too that I'm glad Laura and Allison, you both touched on some employee sort of employment rates and things like this. And so that's helpful because that was another question. Beth, also just as a direct operator, just wanting to know if you wanted to comment on this question as well.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's probably been, I think we're the smallest operator on this call, so to speak, and everything that everyone said about the steps that they're taking, we've taken those steps. And like I said when I was giving the presentation, I'm more informed about options for disinfecting things than I've ever been before. Our techs, we routinely always clean our bikes when they come through the shop as well. We don't have the same scale as the other operators. We have 109 stations and we're reaching 800 bikes in the field. So every bike that comes through the shop, we've always cleaned, and we actually routinely clean our stations as well. But of course, when you step up the efforts to try and keep the equipment as clean as possible, we've done those same things. Our techs are using right now a multi-surface cleaner as part of the protocol first on every station they're visiting in the field, and following it with an alcohol spray just to dry quickly on the hand grips. So we're focusing on all the high touch points at a station, and every single bike that would be at that station when the tech arrives, of course. And I heard someone say this earlier, I think it was the presenter from LA, I'm forgetting your name, I'm sorry, but we are also, we've had a volunteer program called Houston B-Cycle Ambassadors, and many of the people who've been involved in that program, we actually have hired to help support some of the cleaning efforts to ramp up that effort and to reach our busiest stations more often. So we are trying to touch our busiest stations in a more focused manner But then this new EPA approved spray will hopefully ease those efforts for us and lessen the strain on our operations right now, because it'll be a lot quicker for our techs in the field to just spray this EPA approved spray that takes 5 to 10 minutes to dry, and then it's essentially effective between 4 and 7 days. So we're looking forward to trying to implement that, and I think that yeah, that's what I can say about sanitizing.
Thanks, Beth. So I am looking at the time, and it looks like we actually don't have all that much time for Q&A. So I want to let everyone know what we're going to do. So I've taken screenshots of all these wonderful questions that we have that came in. It's this huge topic and sort of never enough time to talk about it. So what we're going to do is we're going to compile some themes based on the questions that everybody has submitted. And then when we email a follow-up email in a day or two with the webinar recording and things like this, we're going to try to get some answers to the themes of the questions that have been presented. So sorry, we still don't have enough time to cover all of those. I want to do one last question to leave everyone with, and I want to ask this to all of our presenters, if you can chime in. Here's our parting question. There is a saying, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And I'm wondering, what is a silver lining, one silver lining that you'd like to have out of this moment for the industry moving forward, if you can each go. And I might just tap Aaron Ritz to kick us off, if that's all right, Aaron.
Sure. All right, figured out my mute button. I think that the untapped potential, I think it's been highlighted a lot. I remember Maurice and Caroline both talking about it, which is when I go out for necessities, I see a lot more people walking and biking and just being out. You know, active transportation is really a great way to get around, and I think a lot more people see it. I would love to think about ways we can retain the positive aspects of what we've been going through while not crippling our economy. I think that's really the gonna be the magic.
Thanks, Aaron. Other panelists want to jump in, or I can just ask you as well.
This is Allison. I'll follow in just to dogpile. I'm finding that, I mean, it's a rare inflection point in society when businesses have huge needs and we have people and vehicles to help them respond to their needs. And so entrepreneurial ideas that I have had rolling around in my mind for years, I'm actually starting to try out, like electric cargo bike deliveries, business to business, and or business to consumer. And it's been a real opportunity to connect with businesses who wouldn't. And I apologize for the screaming kid in the background. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Allison.
Hey, Sam, this is Beth. I think the silver lining I'd like to share for Houston, and this has really been, I mean, a very serious and stressful and challenging time. I know my team is feeling that, and there's a lot of concern and worry, of course, just personally and as I stay in touch with friends and family. But, you know, just from an observation in Houston usually has a traffic problem, and Maurice touched on this, but our streets are you know, less crowded than they've ever been, and it really is, as long as you're doing it responsibly, a great time to go out and ride a bike and use that as even just a stress relief. It's something that we're seeing in the ridership numbers, that people are really seeking that, and as long as they're doing it responsibly, you know, we're very proud of that, of providing that service. So I'll just say, from a pollution and traffic standpoint, that's the silver lining that we're seeing in Houston, is it's a really great time to ride a bike.
Hey, this is Colin from Jump. I'll jump in, no pun intended, real quick. I was looking back 12 or 13 years ago when I was a student. I wrote a paper on the history of the bicycle in American cities. I actually just posted this pretty sophomoric paper on my Twitter if anybody wants to look at it. But I did a bunch of research on the rise of bicycles at the turn of the century, and then their precipitous fall after that. And what I found back in that analysis was that the time that bicycles surged during the Great Depression, they surged during World War II, and they surged during the gas crisis in the 70s. And then as the kind of slower burn of the environmental movement picked up in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, they came back. And I think that trend shows that for the last 100 years, every time there's a crisis and every time that resources are scarce, both people and customers, citizens, but even governments, in all those periods, there was really active government facilitation of bikes. Even in the gas crisis in the 70s, there were temporary bike lanes. World War II, the government developed like portable bike parking spots that they could bring around so factory workers could lock up their bikes. Bike production was nationalized. So I think we've always seen that bikes can respond in crises, and when things are really tight, that we turn to them. And I think we should all see that coming with this new industry of bike share. And we should all think about ways to make sure that the value we're bringing is really apparent and hopefully lock it in for, so it doesn't just fade away when the economy gets better, people have more money and gas is cheap. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
This is Caroline. I'm happy to go, Sam. I reflect a lot in moments like this on like why I do the work that I do, and I know that we all are doing the same thing. So what I've always been drawn to about this particular part of transportation is the people. I think the silver lining here is that an incredible community has come together to make our system serve as an essential service during a time of crisis. And I think incredible people are coming together that don't usually get to work together. We're making connections on the Lyft side with, again, like transit agency partners, local unions that have nurses that need bike rides. Like we're making these real important, interpersonal connections that I do believe will be a sort of great rising tide for the industry overall because of the ways that it will allow us to make deeper connections between bike share and transit, or bike share and local governments, in ways we wouldn't have been able to do if we didn't have this crisis. So that's the silver lining I'm most excited about.
Great, thank you.
This is Maurice. I'll just echo everything that everyone else has said, but I'll also add that I've been really excited about the reclaiming of public space. And I think this is allowing us not only to quote, reimagine what that would look like, but to actually experience what that is, particularly here in the US, where space is at such a premium in certain places. So that's one of the silver linings that I see. Obviously, from a Vision Zero perspective, we've seen the number of emergency room visits from car crashes go down. As my wife's a trauma surgeon, she hasn't had as many emergent needs to deal with as they're able to focus on the more pressing issue of the COVID response. So that's another silver lining that I've seen, that people are at least being able to enjoy spaces, hopefully safe at a safe distance, but also that we're also seeing reductions in the number of crashes right now.
Thanks, Maurice. And Laura, I know we're a little over the time, but did you have a silver lining that you wanted to share?
No, I mean, I think that Caroline brought up those points incredibly well, and just echoing, some of the things that we've been thinking about now and ongoing, which is just like bike share as transit, right? I think oftentimes bikes are thought of as separate, or, a separate service. I think here in New York, on a typical day in the summer, like we have, more bike trips on City Bike than, the East River Ferry, than the Staten Island Ferry. On our top ridership days, more rides than, say, the Metro North on the weekends. And so, I think if there's a silver lining for me, it's kind of to build on what Caroline said, in which like bike share has been part of the transit system for a long time, though hasn't been talked about in that way. And now I think increasingly it's being thought of, considered, put in the context of like transit redundancy, and being really in support of you know, essential rides, trips, supporting that ride to the subway, all of that. And so I think that that's the silver lining, exciting part for me.
Thank you. Well, I really appreciate the silver linings that everyone's brought up. I share those sentiments as well. And I just want to say super huge thanks to all of you panelists, especially. This is already a huge time commitment, and we did even go over. And so thanks as well to the attendees for coming and making it possible. And panelists, I'm sure that if we were in person right now, you'd be receiving a standing ovation. So thank you so much for sharing what you did today and painting the picture of the COVID-19 impacts and lessons learned and silver linings that are coming out of this. So thanks a lot, and we will all, I'm sure, see each other at some point soon post COVID-19, and in the meantime across the virtual screen. So thank you everyone for being here today, and that will close us off.
Thanks so much.